Thank you for watching Grassroots Television. Visit grassrootstv.org for on-demand community archive footage, as well as educational, inspiring, and entertaining local programming. Your contribution allows us to bring a voice to the Valley and to preserve media that has been a part of the community since 1972. Visit grassrootstv.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Twitter. The following program, Letting the Stranger In, is generously underwritten by the Jewish Community Center Chabad in Aspen, as well as the Fund for Interfaith Understanding. Enjoy, and again, thank you for tuning in to Grassroots Community Network.
Letting the stranger in may be a more action-oriented activity than encountering the stranger, although it is kind of an obvious what happens next kind of question. So I began to think about how social change comes about, and I was drawn back to a book I have in my library entitled The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. He has a chapter about how social movements happen. And I thought I would share with you a story he shares, not because the narrative is similar, it's really not, but because it's kind of a roadmap about, or sort of a map of social change. And much of what we have talked about in these last few days have to do with what kind of changes we would like to see in society. And so this is just one example. I call it Lessons from Birmingham and Rosa Parks. You may know the story of Rosa Parks and how her actions really were pivotal in the civil rights movement in the 1960s here in the United States. But you may not know some of the circumstances that made it successful. Because, you know, she was not the first person who had been arrested for not giving up her seat on the bus. But some other things may have been different. So it was Thursday, December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, about 6 p.m. A petite 42-year-old African-American woman in rimless glasses and a conservative brown jacket stepped onto the bus, and she dropped her 10-cent fare into the till after a long day at work at the department store where she worked as a seamstress. The bus was crowded, and by law, the first 4 rows were reserved for white passengers. The area where blacks were allowed to sit in the back was already full. So Rosa Parks sat in a center row, right behind the white section, where either race could claim a seat. And as the bus got more crowded and all the rows were filled, some, including a white man, were standing in the aisle. And when the bus driver saw the white man on his feet, he shouted back at the black passengers in Parks' area to give up their seats. But no one moved. So the driver pulled over to a bus stop and walked back. Y'all better make light of yourselves and let me have those seats. Well, 3 black passengers got up and moved to the rear, but Parks stayed where she was. She wasn't in the white section, she told the driver, and besides, there was only one white rider standing. If you don't stand up, I'm going to call the police and have you arrested. And she was arrested. You see, the battle for race relations in the United States took a pivot, made a change there from a battle that was being waged in the courts and in the legislatures to the communities. Now it would draw its power from the communities. the black community would rise up and boycott the city buses. The boycott would end when the law segregating races on public transportation was stricken from the books 381 days later. That became the epicenter of the civil rights campaign, not only because of an individual act of defiance, but because of social patterns. Social habits, behaviors that occur unthinkingly across dozens and hundreds of people. Sometimes they're hard to see at first, but they are worth looking at. Well, historians and sociologists will tell us that there's a three-part process that shows up over and over again. A movement starts because of the social habits of friendship and the strong ties between close acquaintances. Let's call these strong ties friends. And then a movement grows because of the habits of a community and the social pressures that hold neighborhoods together, or clans together, groups together. Let's call these weak ties, or friends of friends. And a movement keeps going because the leaders help participants gain new habits. And the new habits help create a new identity. People feel ownership. Now, social change happens in other ways also. And the details differ in different eras and different struggles. But understanding social habits work, how habits work, helps explain why Montgomery and Rosa Parks became a catalyst. As I said, there were other arrests, but none resulted in what this did. Activism was in the courts. So when Parks was arrested, it sparked something unusual within the city of Birmingham. Okay, let's look at that. First of all, Rosa Parks was deeply respected and embedded within her community. She belonged to dozens of social networks across Montgomery. And Montgomery had hundreds of small groups that created the city's sort of social fabric. Every adult, it seemed, especially every black adult, belonged to some kind of club, church, social group, community center, neighborhood organization, and often more than one. And within these groups and networks, Parks was particularly well known and liked. She was one of those people that everybody said she gave more than she got. And her friendships really cut across the social and economic strata of Montgomery. Here's some of the things she did. She was secretary of the local NAACP. She attended a Methodist church. She helped oversee a youth group at the Lutheran church close to where she lived. She spent some weekends volunteering at a shelter and others at a garden club. And on Wednesday nights, she joined a group of women who knit blankets for a local hospital. She volunteered dressmaking services for poor families. And she provided last-minute gown alterations for wealthy families and debutantes. Her relationships, you see, span the social and economic hierarchies. She had what sociologists would call strong ties, first-hand relationships with dozens of groups across Montgomery. And those groups didn't usually come together. You might say she transcended the social stratifications of the black community and Montgomery as a whole. So what happens when Rosa Parks lands in jail? Well, she called her parents home. She was panicked, and her mother had no idea what to do, and she started going through a kind of a mental Rolodex of her daughter's friends. Well, she called the wife of the former head of the Montgomery NAACP, whose name was E.D. Nixon, who in turn, she called her husband and told him that Parks needed to be bailed out of jail. And he immediately agreed to help. And he called a prominent white lawyer named Clifford Durr. Clifford Durr knew Parks because she had hemmed dresses for his 3 daughters. And Nixon and Durr went to jail and bailed her out and took her home. You see, these 2 men had been looking for a perfect case to challenge the city's transportation laws. So they asked Parks, and remember, they were already friends. They already knew each other. If she would be willing to let them take her case to court. She thought about it. Now, her husband didn't want her to, and he said, "Those white people will kill you." But she agreed that she would help if they thought it would be helpful for her to do that. So that night, it started to filter through the black community, particularly from a teachers group that got together. So there were teachers, students, and parents. And they got out some flyers. Somebody got into somebody's office and mimeographed. Remember those? Mimeographed flyers and got those out. They asked people to stay off the buses on Monday morning. Now, many of those people that received a flyer, they knew Rosa Parks. You see, there's a natural instinct embedded in friendship, a sympathy that makes us willing to fight for somebody when we know they've been treated unjustly. And studies show that people have no problem ignoring a stranger's injuries. But when a friend is insulted, or a sense of outrage is enough to overcome the inertia that usually makes protests hard to organize. Even people that hardly knew her decided to participate. Why? Because their friends were. Their peers were. So here, like number 2 before, this is the power of weak ties, friends of friends. Another thing, and on the morning after he bailed Rosa Parks out of jail, E.D. Nixon placed a call to the new minister who was at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Martin Luther King Jr. Nixon launched into an account of Parks' arrest and said, "Can we have a meeting at your church, and will you be involved?" The young pastor King was 26 years old, had been in Montgomery for a year, wasn't quite sure what his role was. He was kind of worried about it. Nixon was asking for his help, and he said, "Let me think about it, and you call me back." So what does Nixon do? Nixon reaches out to one of King's friends, Ralph Abernathy, one of the stronger of King's ties, and said, "Help convince this young minister to help us." So sure enough, when he called King back, King said, "I'm on. I'll be with you." So the boycott meeting happened, and the people heard about it in their churches on Sunday, and the message was getting out one way and another. And Monday morning, Coretta Scott King looked up early, and she got up early with her husband, and they watched those buses, and they saw the headlights of the South Jackson bus, and nobody was on it. And they watched more, and the people were not on the buses. In an hour, they counted 8 persons. On a regular day, there would have been hundreds. So that afternoon at the courthouse, Rosa Parks was found guilty of violating the state's segregation laws, and hundreds of the black population appeared at the courthouse for support. Well, the boycott and this impromptu people showing up at the courthouse, that was different from Montgomery. And it all come together in 5 days. It started with friends, and then friends of friends. And then it began to get a life of its own. But those social habits were not enough to extend it one day. It had to take on more life for more groups. Others have studied this idea of strong ties and weak ties to see how things happen. But what it says to me, and I share with you, is that when it comes to encouraging social change, consider your strong ties and consider your weak ties and see what might be done and how you might have a part in it. And then after that is how can it be spread to more shoulders? This is not always the way it's happened, but it's the way it happens sometimes, and it happened in Montgomery. So I invite you to consider your hopes for social change. And then look at your relationships. Again, your strong ties and your weak ties, your friends and your friends of friends. The influence of organizations of which you're a part. And maybe some of the friendships we have developed here through Carolyn, they may be important. They may be really important sometime. Thank you for the friendships. And thank you for the friends of friends that hopefully we may reach out to one of these days. And thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you for watching Grassroots Television. Visit grassrootstv.org for on-demand community archive footage, as well as educational, inspiring, and entertaining local programming. Your contribution allows us to bring a voice to the Valley and to preserve media that has been a part of the community since 1972. Visit grassrootstv.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Twitter. The following program, Letting the Stranger In, is generously underwritten by the Jewish Community Center Chabad in Aspen, as well as the Fund for Interfaith Understanding. Enjoy, and again, thank you for tuning in to Grassroots Community Network.